Academy. Okay. In this video, we're going to talk about how to read a Bitcoin liquidation map. Okay. Now, this specifically applies to those who like to leverage trade. All right. If you're a leverage trader, then you must understand the data points on a liquidation map because it helps you to avoid being liquidated. Okay. So looking at the screen on the left, we'll go ahead and dive right into it. So this is the Binance BTC USDT liquidation map. So first of all, what does that mean? Well, that means that this liquidation chart is referring to trading Bitcoin and USDT on the Binance exchange. Okay. So if you don't know, Binance is the biggest centralized exchange in the world. All right. So billions and billions of dollars are traded through Binance every single day. So this is a good starting point when it comes to understanding liquidation thresholds in the overall market. All right. So let's talk about what these data points actually mean and how to use them to your advantage when you're trading. Okay. So if we look here at the bottom, this represents the price of Bitcoin, right? And here we have how much money is actually sitting inside of different trades, right? And on the left side, we have how much leverage is being applied, right? So it's basically a multiplier of how much leverage is being applied, right? So that's what each one of these axes represent from left to bottom to right. Now, if we talk about the different data points, we can read the legend at the top. So the cumulative short liquidation leverage is everything on the right side in green. The cumulative long liquidation leverage is everything on the left side in red. Okay. And this dotted line represents the current price point of Bitcoin at the time, right? So according to this liquidation map right now, the current price is 87,836. Now, if you want to maintain an accurate current price, this number does not automatically update. You're going to need to click this refresh, and then it'll refresh and it'll show you the current price. Okay. But no worries about that. First, you want to just look at the data. And then once you look at the data, you can refresh it and you can go from there. So let's talk about the data itself. So if we hover over these orange lines, we'll talk about the cumulative short liquidation leverage first. So if we hover over these orange lines, what it represents is it tells us how much the orange actually represents how many people are in 100x leverage trades, right? And how much money will actually be liquidated at that particular price point. Okay. The yellow bars represent 50x leverage trades. Okay. So this would be for someone who's looking to maybe short or long the market. But what it lets you know is, particularly I use it for, if I want to short the market, I'm going to look at the cumulative short liquidation leverage price points, and I'm going to try to get me an entry point where I see there could be a lot of liquidations for shorts. So let's talk about what that actually means. So let's say I'm looking to get into a leverage trade with Bitcoin. I want to put $1,000 of collateral up, and I'm looking for a good entry price, right? So what I would do is I would come to this chart. I would see what the current price of Bitcoin is. Okay, it's at 87,686. Then I'll look at the price points down below and I'll read, where does it seem like there is a lot of liquidation that can happen if Bitcoin reaches a certain point on the upside, right? So the higher the bar, the more money will be liquidated at that particular price point, right? So if we just start with this first bar here, which is pretty high, that's at a price point of $88,348. Okay. So, okay, that's the first bar. The second bar reads, there will be liquidations of up to $83.98 million if Bitcoin reaches $88,410, right? Then in between that, at about 88,472, there's $106 million, 106.59 in cumulative short liquidations. If we go to the next bar, which is a much higher liquidation threshold here at $88,534, there's going to be 150 million 0.86 dollars that can be liquidated in the leverage markets, right? So what does this mean for me? Well, it tells me as a trader who's looking to short Bitcoin, I want to make sure that I don't have a liquidation threshold that is within these high ranges where people are getting liquidated, because what the whales try to do is they manipulate the market, right? So they can manipulate the market by using their buying power, right? So for example, let's say if I'm a whale and I want to make $1 million today or more than that, I might get on the phone with my buddies who are all billionaires and I might say, hey guys, let's buy Bitcoin at spot, right? And if we buy it at spot and we put enough volume and money into the market at one time, then the price of Bitcoin is going to tick up, right? So we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar market cap asset right here. So that means it takes a lot of liquidity to move the price of it, right? But if you have $100 billion, $200 billion amongst yourself and your pals, well, you guys can probably move the price of Bitcoin, right? So what a scenario, and not saying that this is exactly what happens, I'm just giving you guys a scenario and painting a picture. So let's say that, okay, we see that there are a lot of traders who have liquidations that can happen if Bitcoin were to reach, let's go to a high point. Let's say Bitcoin were to reach 88,906, right? So that means that $360.42 million would be liquidated just in that one price point alone, but also every price point where there are liquidations before that, before the right in between the current price and that price, all of those will also be liquidated if Bitcoin pushes up to this price of $88,906, right? So what they could do is you can say, hey, let's buy a lot of spot. Bitcoin is at 87,686 right now. Let's buy a lot of spot. And as we buy, we're going to push the price up. And as price goes through these different liquidation thresholds, 88,472, 88,534, all the way up to 88,906, that's when we'll stop buying and we'll start selling our spot. Okay. So this is what's called you know, a short squeeze. Okay. You have short squeezes and long squeezes. Short squeezes is where you might see the price of Bitcoin spike up to a certain point in a certain time frame. In a smaller time frame, it might spike up high, like from 87,686 all the way up to 88,906 within a short time frame, because what's happening is there's a lot of liquidity sitting in between this 87,686 and this 88,906 price point, right? We have probably $1 billion plus of liquidity, as we can tell by reading this chart, sitting in between that price point. So when price wicks up to this 88,906, all of these traders who are within this liquidity range as far as being liquidated, they are getting liquidated, meaning that they're blowing their trading accounts, or whatever trade they had open is getting liquidated, right? And all that capital goes back into the market. So at that point, if I'm a whale, once I see, all these traders just got liquidated, and I told all my buddies to buy spot so we can push Bitcoin up to this price point. Well, now we reached the price point that we were targeting. So now what we'll do is we'll start to sell our spot Bitcoin, right? And simultaneously, while we're selling our spot Bitcoin, we're going to open up short positions. Okay. And guess what price they're going to open up these short positions at? Well, we're going to open up our short positions at a price right at about $88,906, or maybe even slightly higher, because sometimes when you buy spot, right, you can't predict the exact price that Bitcoin is going to push up to, but they know that they bought enough spot Bitcoin to push it up to this 88,906 range. So in that case, we're going to set some limit orders to short Bitcoin somewhere around this range. So if we simultaneously sell our spot Bitcoin in the billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, and simultaneously we open up a short, and we might put a few million in collateral for a short entry price at about 88,906. Well, guess what's going to happen? As they're selling the spot, Bitcoin price is going to do what? It's going to push down, right? So if price is pushing down because they're selling their spot, what's happening with their leverage trade that they opened up at a price point of 88,906? Well, as price pushes down, especially depending on how much leverage they put in, they're making money as price pushes down, right? And typically they'll push price back down with spot, back to another area of liquidation, but on the opposite side, right? Where people who are longing Bitcoin will probably get liquidated, right? So that's when you see those huge spikes that happen in price. And those whales, they will get out their trades once price pushes down from their entry of 88,906, and let's say it pushes back down to this long liquidation threshold right here that I'm hovering over at a price point about 87,170. Well, that's a $2,000 spread, right? So that $2,000 spread with the right amount of leverage and collateral can equal up to hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars in profits, right? So that's what's happening there. So as a trader, it'll be smart for me to read this data if I'm entering into a short and try to get an entry point that is similar to an entry point that a whale would get into, right? So if I wanted to short the market, a good entry would probably be 88,906. Why do I say that? Because if whales wanted to liquidate people, they could buy spot and liquidate all this money here. And once you get to 88,906, you see there's a big drop off here, right? The liquidation, the amount of money that could be liquidated is much lower than it was when the price was here, right? So in that case, I would look to either get an entry maybe at 88,968 or maybe at even 88,906, because I'm thinking like a whale. And if I get the same entry as they get, after this candle wicks up and all these people are liquidated, well, price is going to push down. And me being a great trader, I'm going to ride that wave while price is pushing down to one of those long liquidation price points, and I'll take profit there, right? So that's how the whales think, guys. And that's how you want to think as a smart trader. And no one is going to give you this information. You have to really study. You really have to study the data. So not saying that this is the end all be all for setting up your entries and your exits or your take profits when it comes to leverage trading. However, this is just another area of confluence, and it's free data, right? You can come to this website, coinglass.com, /pro/futures/liquidation map. You can also go to Google and you can type in Bitcoin liquidation map, and you'll find a link to CoinGlass, and you can pull the same chart up for free. Okay, so this is free data, guys. This is free game that I'm giving you. And that's how short squeezes work. So let's talk about long squeezes, right? And it's just the flip side, right? It's just vice versa to what I just said. So let's say, for example, if I wanted to long Bitcoin and I'm trying to figure out a good entry price, well, I'll say, let's refresh the chart. Let's say the current price of Bitcoin is 87,773, and I wanted to long Bitcoin. Well, I would look at the liquidation chart and I would see that, well, these 3 bars here, actually these 5 or 6 bars, there's a lot of liquidity sitting there where people can get liquidated on their longs. So what could happen is price could wick down to, maybe 86,798. If it does wick down to 86,798, well, whoever was sitting at 87,108, 87,46, 86,984, 86,860, 86,922, all of those people are getting liquidated, right? And if we hover over each one of the bars, we can see, okay, so hopefully you guys can hear me. All right, so we're back recording. So hopefully you guys can hear me fine. So as we hover over each one of these bars, right, we can see how much money is actually getting liquidated at those price points. We're looking at the cumulative long liquidation leverage, right? So we can see 21 million, 83 million, 93 million, 137 million, 163 million. So in between the current price of 87,773, theoretically speaking, and the price point of 86, 86, let's say 798, there's going to be half a billion or $1 billion in liquidations, right? So as a savvy trader, what I would look for is an entry price for a long somewhere around 86,798. Okay, somewhere around 86,798, because after that price point, we see there's a huge drop off in the amount of money that's going to be liquidated at those other price points, right? Because the bars are much smaller. Okay, so that's how you read this liquidation map. Okay, that's how you read this liquidation map, and that's how you use it to your advantage to think like a whale. Because if I enter into along here and there's a long squeeze where we see price wick down pretty far, it might come down to this last high level of liquidation, and then the price probably will push up, right? And it'll probably push back up, to one of these areas of um, high liquidation when it comes to shorts, right? So I would try to get an entry price maybe at 86.7798, or maybe even a little bit lower. And then I would probably do a take profit at like 88,348, right? And there we go. You know, I've just executed a good trade. Um, and I get out the market, right? Because once we get back to these other areas of liquidation on the short side, if I'm doing a long, then I want to be out of my trade, because you never know, price could get manipulated there. So these manipulations kind of tie in with the New York Stock Exchange hours, from 9:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So whenever you're trading, you want to keep in mind to maybe exit trades. If you're trading prior to the stock market opening, you might want to exit your trade before 9:30, because once the stock market opens up, there's more volume being put into Bitcoin when it comes to trading with ETFs and other things. So manipulations can happen, guys. Um, if you're trading outside of the hours of 9:30 to 4:30 Eastern, then it's less likely that these manipulations can happen, but they still do, because there are other global markets that trade Bitcoin as well. So you just want to be wary, and you want to be aware of the time frames for each global market, right? And I can give you more insight to that if you book a private session with me. We can do a deep dive into this type of data and how to analyze it and how to use it to your advantage. But this is just another area of confluence that you want to use when it comes to leverage trading, guys. And I really hope that this was helpful for you, when it comes to actually setting up your trades. All right. Because you also want to make sure that you just don't solely use this, but you want to analyze the actual price of Bitcoin. So this is TradingView that I'm pulling up here. You want to analyze the price of Bitcoin. And as you can see, I have my chart. I'm looking at Bitcoin and USDT. And as you can see, I have my chart with my support levels and resistance levels as the yellow lines. And then also I even have a high time frame bearish trend drawn out, right? As we've been getting lower lows and lower highs with Bitcoin ever since October, when we hit an all-time high of about 126,000. So you want to use this liquidity map here. Sorry, you want to make sure you use this liquidity map in confluence with your actual chart and your support and resistance levels, um, when you're setting up your entries, when you're setting up your stop losses, when you're setting up your take profits, when it comes to trading. Okay, when it comes to leverage trading Bitcoin. So with that being said, guys, I hope that this was very informative for you. You also can change the days for this chart, right? So you can look over a 7-day period, right? You can look over 7-day period. So that just means that um, each one of these wicks, or so to speak, they represent a period of 7 days. I typically use the 1 day. That's the best. That's what works for me, and that's my personal preference. But this is something that you can use to your advantage. And also, you have other liquidation maps on this page. Bitcoin Exchange liquidation map. Preferably, I use the Binance liquidation map, but you have Bitcoin Exchange, and you also have Hyperliquid liquidation map as well. So if you trade perpetuals on Hyperliquid, you can look directly at that there. But ideally, just looking at the Binance BTC USDT liquidation map will work fine, because there's so much volume being traded on Binance that it kind of what you read here pretty much can go for just the rest of the market, no matter what type of exchange you're trading on. So, this is how you read the data. And I hope that this was, like I said, once again, I hope that this was very informative for you. If you want to book a consultation with me, we can dive deep into this. I also have retainers where if you need, help throughout the entire month, I have monthly retainers where you can, pay for my services, and I can help you to analyze the market, navigate your trades, and ultimately protect your capital, manage your risks, and grow your capital, right? Just through education and insight, with using tools like this and others as well. So keep that in mind, guys. Happy trading. Happy holidays to you, as it is December 23rd as I make this video. I hope this was very informative. This is DeFi Guy signing out. Peace.